I was 16 years old, I ran my first pro race, a 300-mile race kind of out west in Alaska. My dad and I each went out to this race. He took the varsity squad, the top 14 dogs. I took the JV squad. We went out there and with a well-prepared team. That was the key at this point, was build a big team, prepare a monstrous dog team, and then go race in the races. We went out there and did a 300-mile race, and I raced. I was good at understanding dogs. I had grown up in the dog houses. I had been raised by dogs. I was like Mowgli. Anybody watch Jungle Book? I love that movie, partially because it's the only video we had on VHS. We never had a TV growing up. I was homeschooled all the way through high school. All right, I'll be honest here. I wasn't homeschooled, I was just home. But anyway, so I ran my first pro race, and I finished 4th by 1 minute. Another musher beat me for 3rd place by 1 minute, a $3,000 difference in purse. I was 16. I beat, 13 mushers in that race. Either had already, or in the next 3 years, became top 5 finishers in the Iditarod, an extremely competitive race. I beat my dad in the varsity squad by 20 minutes. I finished with a 5-dog team, which was the smallest team you could legally finish the race with. And how races work, if you get a dog that's sore or tired, you can leave them behind at any checkpoint. Or the most common reason a dog is left behind at a checkpoint is they do great, they get to the checkpoint, but then sleeping was a higher priority than eating, and they curl up to sleep. And without consuming the necessary food, they're not allowed to or able to continue running down the trail. And at the time, I thought this was the perfect race. We built a big team, we went to the race, we raced really hard, we finished with 0 fuel. I ran the last 20 miles of that race in front of the sled, actually pulling with the dogs. I gained a reputation in that race for being one of the hardest working mushers on the trail. It didn't hurt that at that point I had just won nationals in Olympic style wrestling. I became the first Alaskan to do so. I was in good shape. And like I said, I beat my dad in the varsity squad by 20 minutes. At this point, in racing, and in my mind, and I'd say racing as a whole, the entire sport, this was viewed as the perfect race. Finishing with 0 fuel left in the tank. Knowing your team well enough to know exactly how much fuel and how hard you could push and still be able to reach the finish line. But there's some problems with that style. All right, so this down here, this is, I guess, the best image I could find for this. But you see this team here, and this is not a 5-dog team, but this is a team racing in that style, where a lot of the dogs, like look at the dog in the middle of that team, the one by himself, the light-colored one. This guy here is putting more pressure on the neckline than pulling on the tug line. This dog is not really helping the team. And when you race dogs in this style of racing the Iditarod, what ends up happening is the dogs take matters into their own hands, or paws as the case may be, and they're going to decide that if we're going to push this hard, I'm going to decide when I feel like pulling and when I don't feel like pulling, because you're setting too high of a bar for a lot of these athletes. Now in 2009, my wife and I decided to start racing the Iditarod competitively. Sounds pretty normal, right? I'd grown up racing. I had been in the sport my entire life. My family had been doing it, 3 generations, yada, yada, yada. The only problem was, in fall of 2008, my wife and I did not own property. We did not own a single sled dog. I did not own a sled. I did not own one harness. I did not own a single item of mushing paraphernalia. So when we decided to start racing the Iditarod competitively, this was a pretty major undertaking. I was able to secure one sponsor for $50,000. That effectively was our entire budget for operation. All right, still, that's not unreasonable to run the Iditarod on a $50,000 budget. That's actually a pretty good budget if you just want to finish the race and you already have everything, you already have a kennel. But we set yet a higher goal. I wanted to become the youngest person ever to win the Iditarod, which gave us only 4 years, or 4 Iditarods. We will operate on more of a fiscal calendar here. We gave us 4 Iditarods to accomplish that goal. So the dogs that I was able to procure for that 2009 Iditarod were later kindly referred to as the Scrubs. They were the biggest mixed match group of dogs you could possibly imagine. I had everybody from Guinness weighing in at about a whopping 37 pounds soaking wet, all the way up to Cessna hitting more about 70 to 75 pounds. We had huge variation in our team. We also had one consistent trait in our team, and that was every single dog on my team had failed in another kennel, in another normal training regimen. Every dog that comes up for sale is a dog that had effectively failed in that operation. It's like, kind of like getting fired, I guess. But from the dogs I view, fortunately, they don't see it that way. In my mind, the best thing you can do for a dog is make sure they're working a place that they're working well at. In my kennel, we sell a few dogs. We raise and train and race a lot more of them, and we obviously have a long retirement plan. If they're in our kennel, we're responsible for them for the entire life of that dog. If we do sell a dog, our standard is it has to be one of the top 5 dogs in the kennel that's buying it. That way, we know that that dog is going to be a success where it ends up. So who we sell dogs to is far more important than how much we sell dogs for. Anyway, in acquiring this team, we were able to get an entire team of dogs for about $17,000, which is pretty nominally priced. I bought a lot of them from my dad. He was more than happy to kind of get some of those dogs out of his kennel. They're a bit of a liability. We leased dogs from different places. We had every possible style. And again, the only consistent factor in these dogs is they'd all proven that they couldn't hang with the big boys. They couldn't race at that top level. So the first thing that I did is I went through the team and tried to figure out what has caused each of these dogs to fail in the past. We tried to look at it from their eyes. And what we saw is that doing the longer runs, the big long trips, the big hard pushes are the things that brought out the weaknesses in these dogs. Racing at my dad's level, where most of them had been, they had been expected to do 70 to 80 mile runs, recuperate in maybe 5 to 6 hours, and then get back on the trail again. We knocked it back to a sustainable pace. We brought it down and had to rebuild the dog's confidence. That was one of the hugest factors here. And we never did a run more than 40 miles. We set that as a standard. We wanted these dogs to know that every time we took off, as long as I was on the back of the sled, their new musher, we were going to do something that they were capable of. We set small goals to begin with. We also set a shorter rest time at 4 hours, and we did that 4-hour rest every single time. Every time we pulled into a checkpoint, the dogs knew what to expect. They knew what was going to come in the next couple hours. We started doing this routine, and we started focusing on building a sustainable training and racing style that wasn't about kind of playing on the dog's super athleticism qualities, because these dogs weren't the super athletes. These were the ones that had proven they couldn't hang. But we built a system that was based around their strengths, which was, at the end of the day, if you set a sustainable pace, they were still a sled dog, and they could still do it day after day after day after day out there. Long story short, we brought this team together, completely revamped their training and racing style, rather than focusing on setting a very high level of operation and hiring employees at $100 an hour to be able to operate at that high level, and then putting them in an environment where this is the standard, you either do it or get out. We set it up to say, this is the group we have to work with. How are we going to set them up to succeed in this environment? And we changed the rules a little bit for them. And we took the budget dog team out there, and we ended up finishing the Iditarod in 6th place, which was phenomenal, honestly. Our goals were in the top 20. What we realized was once we got on the Iditarod and raced at a sustainable pace the entire way, because I was more concerned about finishing the race than trying to be competitive, the dog team continued to build and excel. And we saw greater speed in the team. Speed is our equivalent of income, by the way. We saw greater speed in the team because they knew what to expect. Each run they got up, and they weren't afraid of this being a run that was above their level. They knew what the run was going to be. They knew that I would stop before it was too long of a distance for them. In the checkpoints, they rested and ate and recuperated far more effectively because they knew our routine. And like many people, if we set our alarm clock at 6 a.m. every morning, we generally end up waking at 5:59, right? You know when that alarm's going to go off. Again, by building in that normal and consistent 4-hour stop, the dogs would pop up, well-rested and ready to rock and roll after that break. The routine was huge for these guys, and it paid off with huge dividends. My dad, racing his $250,000+ dog team that he's been honing for some 20+ years now, finished only 30 minutes ahead of us. And it definitely caught his attention, and he started reassessing how he was training and racing dogs. My realization was that our previous thought on racing dogs, the idea that a race was about going out there, building up the team, and then starting the race and pushing as hard as you can, was not the best way to do it. You could sustain a team. You could build a team over the course of the race. And we started working on this kind of theory of building a positive spiral, doing runs or workouts within the dog's capability level to where they were ready to eat and recuperate well when we stopped. After having a good rest and a good meal, they were ready to run at a higher level next time. After that next run was accomplished successfully, they again ate well. We started building this positive spiral where each success built on the previous success, rather than the negative spiral that most mushers had been operating on, where they would do a big challenging run, and the best 75% of the athletes in the team would eat well. The other 25% would be suffering or struggling, then they would usually get left behind because they just couldn't hold the pace. And then again, the dogs would be a little bit weaker on the next run, and it would appear to be a bigger challenge to them because they hadn't recuperated well. So the focus became around building that positive spiral in the team. Now, in 2012, after having continued to work on the same theory, I guess, for the past 3 years, we set off on our final chance to become the youngest person ever to win the Iditarod. The previous year, I had finished in 4th place, but I was about 6 hours behind the winning team. My team was still entirely comprised of dogs we had purchased from other kennels. And again, our budget was pretty limited. So we were picking up dogs wherever we could, and there was a few key traits that I was looking for. And the most important trait to me was not size, it wasn't even their gait, it wasn't their hair coat, it wasn't their design or anything like that. It was mental. I can work with a dog that's willing to work. First and foremost is that my team has to want to work for me. So far we've talked about what we can do for the team, and that's really important. But secondly, the team has to be able to go out there and get the job done. And there are times when you have to realize that it's time to cut a dog loose. It's time to let a player go because they're not benefiting the team as a whole. So we set a high standard, and fortunately with sled dogs, they absolutely love their job. It's bred into them to run and pull and travel. So getting dogs that want to go is pretty easily done. And again, it's setting the dogs up to succeed and putting them in a situation where athletically what we're asking them to do is well within their means. We started out the Iditarod in 2012, continuing this theory and developing the dogs on the race, and focusing on only racing the dogs for maybe the final 200 to 300 miles of the race. But prior to that, building the team. And ultimately, you have to forget about your competition. Because when you're on the Iditarod, the best chance you have of winning the race is getting to the finish line as quickly as possible. And that seems like a really, really simple statement right there, right? I mean, you get there quick, you win, potentially. But it's amazing how many people miss that point. Because in a race, what do we start doing? We start racing our competition. We start looking at our competition and what are they doing? Oh, he's 6 hours ahead, he's 4 hours ahead. And you try to catch up with them. The leaders try to bolster their confidence by being on par or keeping up with their competition. We had to let go of a lot of that. And that is a difficult thing to do. You have to look at your team, because your team is the only team that you have control over on the Iditarod. I have no control over trying to win the race. The only thing that I have control over is building my team. And by building my team, the result is we will win the race. So in the 2012 Iditarod, it was pretty easy to do that for the first 700 miles. Because I was in the middle of the pack, I had confidence that we were setting a good pace, we were within striking distance. I knew that it was possible for us to win the Iditarod. Not likely by a long shot, but we set out on a style that would give us an opportunity, and that's the best thing I could do for that team, was put them in a position where there was a chance they could win. And we had to do things differently so that if the market turned our way, we'd be in position. But it did not give us the majority chance by any shot. The only problem came along about 300 miles into the Iditarod when our style was working so well that I was actually in the lead of the race at 300 miles to go rather than being in position to catch up with 300 miles to go. That had been our plan. And all of a sudden, things started looking different because now we were actually in the lead. And there's a lot of media attention. For the first time, people were looking at us and saying, what is Dallas going to do? And the standard was when a musher broke and actually got into the front, they tried to make a run for it as hard as they could and get as much distance between them and second place as possible. And usually in the process of making that big push, inevitably, they would weaken their team. And then the whole pack would catch up again, and then somebody else would break and try to get way out in front. And again, they would falter and the teams behind them would catch up. So we almost did that. And I remember so clearly, I was coming into a checkpoint and I was going to skip that checkpoint and go right to the next. It was actually my plan. It was the plan on my written schedule, was to kind of make these big moves and catch up with the front pack because I'd anticipated being well behind. And I remember getting into a checkpoint and it just kind of occurred to me, why in the world would I do that? Why would I change the one thing that's been working so well the entire way? Only because that's how everybody before us had ever done it. But then again, if we were going to win the Iditarod, 17 years younger than the 20-year average, we were going to have to do some things a little bit differently. So that's when I decided, you know what, I honestly really don't care about winning the Iditarod, which is not true at all, by the way. But what I care about is building a team that is unstoppable. We're going to build a monster. We're going to see what's going to happen. I mean, heck, I'm 25 years old at this point. I have a huge, hopefully, a big long career in front of us. The things we learn now can have so much impact 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road. So that was actually our decision at that point, is I'm going to build this team. I'm going to keep building them. We don't need to race these guys yet. And the result was, is we ended up playing a cat and mouse game with my other top competitor at that point, which was a lady named Allie Zirkle, one of the best dog drivers we've seen in many, many years. And she's kind of become our de facto rival. She's one of my best friends on the trail, but she came in second place 3 years in a row and was beat each of those years by either myself or my dad. So that kind of builds a rivalry when you do that. Anyway, we ended up playing a cat and mouse game all the way down the trail where I would outrun her team by 40 or 50 minutes on a 40 to 50 mile run. And then we'd get to the checkpoint, and I would give that time, instead of taking that time and trying to get another 40 or 50 minutes ahead of her on the next run, I stayed right with her. I stayed there as long as I could and gave my dogs as much rest as I could. And then on the next run, we'd outrun her by 5 minutes more, and then 10 minutes more. And we kept reinvesting that energy and that effort the dogs gave me into rest. And what I realized in the process of this is the best way to become unstoppable on the Iditarod is have the unstoppable team. So long as you have the unstoppable team, who's going to beat you? I mean, that's the definition of an unstoppable team, right? Or I should say an unbeatable team. So the object of our race became about building that team. And sure enough, it became the more simple way for me. It became the more clear way. Because when you have a 4-hour lead on your competition, that's great. That's really, really awesome. It's so nice having a 4-hour lead. Except for, it's really disposable. The first big storm that comes along and stops the entire race, your lead can disappear that fast because of reasons out of your control. By building your team, you keep the power within your control. Now if a storm stops the race and I'm dead even with second place, but I have the stronger team, because instead of investing that energy into getting a lead, I invested it into getting a bigger team. Now in that same storm, a few things will happen. First of all, it's going to take a bigger storm to stop me than it will take my depleted opponent. When the storm starts to break, I'll be able to move sooner. Again, I can travel in worse conditions than my opponent can. I keep beating on that microphone. I'm going to move over here. Also, I can always travel faster. If I leave the final checkpoint dead even with my opponent, I'm going to beat him to the finish line by 40, 50 minutes. It keeps more things in my control. And this was another level that we began to learn. As a leader on these teams, I wanted to take responsibility for absolutely everything. Call me a control freak, but I wanted to control everything I possibly could. Because as soon as we gave something up, let it out of our control, we become less of a leader. Because we don't have the ability to affect the outcome. So if I'm going to get a lead, okay, that's great, but now I've handed off some control. I've weakened my team, which I hate doing, and I've handed control off to Mother Nature, which is always a scary thing to do. So in the 2012 race, we finally crossed the finish line, became victorious, and accomplished our goal of becoming the youngest person to ever win the Iditarod. But what I felt was the bigger accomplishment in that was the learning. I guess the learning curve of sorts that we went through and the realizations, actually having the opportunity to race in the front of this race and realizing that our opponents were still just humans and canines and they had to play by the same rules we did. We weren't any different than them, even though we were much younger and much less experienced. And the experience we gained on this race was crucial. This is my team leaving one of the final checkpoints. And I've been looking at dogs my entire life. And what I see here is 2 lead dogs that are ready to set an example. This team is just got done with the rest. Many of the dogs are still bedded down there. A lot of times, I go through, wake everybody up, and we kind of move them off the straw, let them go to the bathroom, let them stretch, and then we get moving. These 2 lead dogs, we got Diesel, I guess, is on your right, and Beetle on your left there. These 2 guys set the tempo, set the pace the entire way. When I said it was time to go, they stood up, leaned into the harness, and the entire team followed. Because those guys are the 2 oldest dogs in the team. And the way that they reacted to me, I guess I'm the leader, they're my managers would be a better term for them. The way they reacted to me and communicated with me and trusted me set the tempo for the entire rest of the team. Now, when we got out there in terrible conditions on the Iditarod, these dogs looked to their leader or their manager who looked to me, and we told them that we were in control of absolutely everything. And that's a crucial point. For all my races after that, I began to look for any possible area that we could take control of something that previously mushers had left to chance.